This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to an exciting new podcast, Business Integrity Innovations, which is brought to you by the Center for International Private Enterprise, CIPE, and the Compliance Podcast Network. This podcast is inspired by Ethics First, a multi-stakeholder initiative led by CIPE that is creating pathways for accountability and sustainable investment in Africa. Companies can standardize their business practices, develop sound corporate governance systems, and demonstrate their commitment to compliance and ethics using Business First. Join myself, Tom Fox, as we explore local innovative compliance solutions for African businesses to gain access to and excel in global value chains. Now, a word about Ethics First. Half of the fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa, and in today's fast-paced, interconnected business world, building networks of reliable partners who put integrity and ethics first is crucial. Join us as we bring you inspiring stories, expert insights, and perspectives from the front lines with business and industry leaders who champion ethics and integrity. In each episode, we deep dive into stories and topics about navigating compliance and integrity challenges, building and strengthening a culture of integrity in challenging contexts, and shaping the future of business integrity through collaboration and positive reinforcement of shared values. Whether you're an expert in matters compliance or just beginning your journey, putting ethics first, Business Integrity Innovations has something for you. Tune in and subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform and never miss an episode. This episode, Tom and Lola visit with Toki Mabogunje on navigating business and compliance in West Africa. I know you'll enjoy it. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Lola for another episode. We are absolutely thrilled today, and I hope I get this right. Toki Mabogunje. Hopefully that's right. So thank you so much. We've been very much anticipating visiting with you for this podcast. Lola, I'm going to pitch it over to you to introduce Toki.
Thanks, Tom. And I've been practicing Toki's name, and I think I have it right this time. It's Mabogunje, right, Toki?
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
Excellent. Yeah, Tom, I saved the day for you and I, so that's great. But it's really great to have you on this pod, Toki. Toki, I know you've served in various really influential capacities as a business leader, a really loud and influential voice in the business association space, most recently as the president of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industries, which is really the oldest and one of the most influential chambers of commerce in Africa's most populous country, Nigeria. And you currently also serve as the vice chair on the World Federation, I think on the Africa, as representing Africa on the World Federation of Chambers board.
Yes.
So I guess let's stop there, because that would be really a long line of responsibilities I'll read out if I had to introduce you in detail. But welcome to this podcast, Toki. It's really great to have you.
Toki, can I pick up and ask you to maybe give us a little taste of your professional background leading up to your current role or roles, as Lola noted?
All right. Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you, Lola. I'm excited. I've been looking forward to this podcast for a while. I'm a legal practitioner, by the way, so a lot of people forget that I'm actually a lawyer. And when I graduated in law, I worked with the federal government of Nigeria as a state counsel for about 9 years. I specialize in international business law. And once I had my stint in public service, I decided to go into the private sector. So I sort of joined a startup organization in broadcasting. Spent 8 years with them. And I spent about 8 years as their chief legal advisor. But somehow when you move from actual practice as a lawyer to become in-house counsel, life gets boring. You can write the contracts in your sleep. So I sort of said, look, it's about time I go out there and do business. And so I worked with them as chief legal officer, head of corporate affairs, and I helped grow that business from a small startup in Nigeria to a global entity, which led me to the US, by the way, Tom. And I became president president of their US subsidiary. And that experience in America for 3.5 years got me really interested in business development. And so I started my firm in January of 2000 and became a business development consultant focused on developing SMEs on the African continent. That's essentially my background. And in order to add value, I started to get involved in policy. And this led me to business member organizations like the Lagos Chamber, where with president. I was president 2020. So that's me.
Lola, over to you.
Toki, when you were president of LCCI, we met and we talked about this really innovative initiative called Ethics First. I wonder if you remember this conversation, because this podcast is really about the innovation around business integrity, and really Tom serves on the advisory committee of Ethics First and is just very encouraging about the approach. I want to give you a minute to just reflect on that meeting and the initiative, and just maybe share with us some thoughts about how you see Ethics First perhaps adding value to enterprises, especially the small and mid-sized ones in Nigeria and in the region.
Yeah, okay. So I do remember that conversation. And I do remember some of my really deep thoughts around it. So one of the issues we have in an emerging economy like ours are issues around compliance, issues around corruption, issues around what we call regulatory challenges. Some of them are systemic, some are quite administrative. And how can the environment be made a lot more conducive for SMEs to become, for small and medium enterprises to become a lot more compliant? And the Ethics First program struck me as one way to begin to, one, communicate the value around compliance and good business ethics and values, but to begin to show a way, or to begin to co-design and discuss the means by which compliance could become much easier. How can compliance and regulation be made as accessible to SMEs so that they become a lot more attractive to their stakeholders and investors and other partners in the ecosystem? And I thought it was a really good program. And by the way, Lola, at that time as well, I was already sitting on the board of the Convention for Business Integrity as well, which had spent quite a bit of its time working in this same area.
Yeah, I agree. I remember that the Convention for Business Integrity had championed the CGRS, which was a novel idea also that they did in partnership with the stock exchange at the time.
Yeah.
And it was really about incentivizing compliance and business integrity. Let me turn to financing, because that's a major issue now in many African economies, including the biggest ones, but, or the most high growth potential markets, Nigeria included, Kenya, which is really finance for businesses, and especially small businesses. I imagine a lot of small businesses would say access to finance is a challenge for a variety of reasons. And so my question is, do you also share the view that MSMEs that understand their market and understand the value of business integrity and business ethics, just beyond checking the box, but actually doing it for sustainability and for growth, sometimes finance is not the challenge. It's really understanding how to build their business with the factors of production that exist, and the finance would come to them as they grow. I'm thinking of some companies, as I ask this question, that have that model, but given your experience of growing a startup at that time into a global company and your experience working with many different businesses, do you also share the view that access to finance is not the problem? The problem is a bit more remote first to the business, and finance will come if the business fixes its corporate vision and then it fixes its philosophy, and also that translates into its corporate culture?
It's a little bit of both. So finance is a problem, yes, but for a lot of other different reasons. I really do believe that finance is not the number one reason. That's for sure. The business itself, I work as a business development consultant. So for 24 years, I've worked with these entities. And sometimes it is as basic as having a vision, having a mission statement, having strategic direction for your company, having your strategic plan in place, having your business plan in place, getting a real sense of where you're going and setting up the structures required for you to get there, looking focused, looking organized, and putting your processes in place. But in the midst of doing all that, there are the issues around compliance as well. So you need to have your business registered. You need to get your tax identification number. You need to get certifications depending on what sector you're in. So if you're in agri-processing or the food and beverage industry, you need those certifications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that regulation and compliance is necessary. And then there's the understanding that the fact that you're the entrepreneur with all of these great ideas, who knows where he or she is going and has the team to make it work, doesn't mean that you have the answers to every problem. So learning actually to use the services of professionals, lawyers, consultants of all kinds, depending on the technicalities. So there's all of that. But once we get past that, there is access to finance issues. And to me, I think unlike the West, and this is what I found when I talked about growing the company in the US, that the financial system in the West is quite deep. It's several levels deep, right? So there are all kinds of options to raising money. But here, because those options don't exist, and our financial system, to my mind, it's a personal opinion, is shallow, meaning that you really can't borrow money long-term. You can't, because the money in the system is not long-term, right? So you can only do short-term borrowing. Short-term borrowing does not fit. It's a shoe that doesn't fit all sizes. So you can't be in agriculture and use short-term borrowing. Essentially, short-term borrowing is only fitted to trading. So if you're trading, you're in retail, yeah, sure, you can use short-term borrowing. But if you're manufacturing, you need 7 to 10 years. You need to be able to borrow 7 to 10 years. If you're in housing, you need 10 to 15 years. So there's an issue with the way our financing is structured as well. And then finally, there's the issue around collaterals. Because I remember when I went out with this company to the US, we were called Minaj. So we were one of 2 companies in Nigeria that were given a satellite license for satellite TV. And the idea was to take African and African-oriented programming to the US for the African and African descendant population in that place. You know, there's the whole thing about the fact that we were in the business of trading our intellectual property. In Nigeria, you can't raise money with that. But in the US, you can. We actually had several banks we could go to and several financial service organizations that were very ready to hop into the boardroom with us and discuss. And we ran a larger operation in Nigeria and we couldn't raise money that way. You needed huge collateral, huge fixed assets to be able to do it. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I hope I'm making sense, but those are my thoughts around that.
I'm going to turn it over to Tom in a minute, but that's very interesting. And just 2 things that came to mind with regards to the last 2 points that you made. One is really just the layers of access or find opportunities to raise capital for businesses in the US. It absolutely spot on. And that speaks to just the policy environment in many developing countries where you want to support startups and small and mid-sized enterprises. And one of the major factors of production being capital is really not accessible. And there are easy ways to make that accessible. The second, fairly easy way to make it accessible. The second interesting thing is just thinking about how, depending on the sector or industry or the type of business, it becomes even more important for the entities that are the borrowing entities to have really strong corporate ethics and ethical maturity, especially if you're talking long-term loans, when board members could change and the corporate integrity or culture of a company can change as board members change. You, as a financier, you would worry about that. But that's really food for thought for us. Thank you, Toki. And I'm also, the final thing is, I'm glad that I now know what company you were referring to. It's Minaj. I should say thank you, because one of my favorite shows was brought to us by the Minaj Broadcasting Group, and it was Friends. Now I've given away my age. But yeah, Tom, let me turn it over to you, because I would...
Yes.
First of all, Toki, I think we're going to have you on another podcast, which will be a master class in business development. I think I learned more in your last 3 answers than I've learned in the last several months. But what I wanted to explore with you is one of the things that I try to communicate, certainly as a Westerner and as an American, is if you have an effective business ethics program, if you have an effective compliance program, if you have a philosophy in your company that says we're going to do business ethically and we're going to allow you, and it's going to be transparent, it actually makes a company more attractive for investors, whether that investor be a financer, whether that investor be a private equity company, whether that investor be a large US or UK multinational who's looking for a local partner, whether it be someone who wants to do business with a company. And I wanted to ask, is that a message that resonates for SMEs that you talk to? Because I find that argument is persuasive, but I wanted to get your perspective on that from the business development angle.
So, Tom, I'm going to ask you to summarize that a little bit. I got lost somewhere in what's the direct question?
The direct question is, do SMEs that you work with understand how doing business ethically and in compliance makes them a more attractive business partner or a more attractive candidate for investment?
Okay, so now I know why I felt a little combobulated, as we say sometimes here. It's also a mix of answers, Tom. And here are the answers. With the medium-sized companies, so those are companies with a growth mindset, right? And who are employing certainly over 100 employees. They're already in that space where they're connecting with stakeholders outside of their immediate environment. They probably have foreign suppliers, or they're supplying services in other regions or other jurisdictions. They understand that they need to comply. Now, the way they would behave to ensure that compliance takes place is that when the environment for compliance or addressing regulatory needs becomes murky, they tend to hire consultants, Tom. So if it's tax compliance, they will hire a tax consultant. If it's legal compliance, they'll hire a lawyer. You know what I mean? If it's about the environment, they will hire an environmental consultant. So that's how the medium-sized companies would deal with it. But they certainly do understand that they're certainly much more attractive to investors if they are compliant. With the smaller companies, they have, I would say, 2 or 3 main concerns. Some see it as a very expensive endeavor. It's very expensive for them to comply. Now, why is it expensive for them to comply? Some of them can't afford to pay these professionals for their services is one thing. When they decide to go the route of doing it alone, they don't have a good understanding of the system that demands compliance. And so they end up maybe paying things under the table, or just literally losing out on the fact that they are not fully compliant. And it's not because they don't want to be compliant. And then you have those who don't have an understanding of it at all. They think, how much more does it add to my business how much better does it make me look? I know I'm accountable. I know I'm honest. I know I'll do the work. Why do I need a piece of paper to prove that? So you have these different scenarios to deal with when you're looking at that space.
So yeah, that really leads to my next question, which is one or two of the top challenges you see. You just told us some of the challenges you see when I asked you my last question, but when it comes to investment and growth and even sustainability, maybe you could really give us one or two of the top challenges that you see.
The first one, the biggest one, is government policy. So in this region, pretty much in the States, at least the 3.5 years that I was there, government policy does not change that much. The needle doesn't move that much. I don't even think the society has tolerance for the needle moving much more than a little bit. But here, governments can do flip-flops. So I'll give you an example. I had a client a few years ago who was importing, she owned a furniture store, and she imported all of the furniture that she retailed, right? Then the government of the day decides, you know what, we're spending a lot of foreign exchange, we're spending a lot of dollars importing furniture that our people can make. Let's ban it. And then the government changes policy and bans the importation of furniture. And all of a sudden, this company is stuck because they have to move from retail to manufacturing. Anyway, the entrepreneur is very passionate, and they do this turnaround and become a manufacturer. And 3 years down the line, policy changes to encourage importation again. So sometimes they have to deal with things like that. There's the whole issue around very high interest rates. That has a lot to do with monetary policy, where the central banks of the country is trying to deal with the exchange value between the dollar and the local currency. So high interest rates is a problem. Political instability can be a problem. If you have that, security can be a problem as well, whether it's of people, property. There's also the issue of access to finance, even for those who operate in the country. So even for investors who come in, when they come in and they make their first set of investment and they're growing the business, they're going to need to be assured that if they needed to get more money to continue to grow the business sustainably, they would have access to it. So I think those are the top, is that 5 that I gave you? Those are the top ones really that are of concern.
Let me maybe flip the geographies and ask you to talk to those in the West. And so how can companies from the United States, from the United Kingdom, from Brazil, from Western Europe, really help support the efforts that you're engaged in around business development and sustainability?
So there are a few ways, maybe 3 or 4 immediately that I can think of off the top of my head. Africa is so well endowed with raw materials, with inputs needed by industry, right? So one way would actually be for companies in the US, in the West, as we said, to invest in Africa and to invest in value-added processes. So rather than the position that Africa is in now, where Africa sort of exports all of its raw material, it gets the value add somewhere else, usually in the West, and then gets sold back to us. It would be nice to have the reverse happen. Invest in Africa and create the products here. And one of the things that's happening now is trade area, and I wonder if you've heard, it's going to be a huge market. Africans will be selling to each other as well, making it I look at it as the last bastion of the world, where the one place that the world has not yet conquered in terms of trade. So whereas you have the Americas, for example, where you are, Tom, trading, I think it's about 60% with each other, South and North America and Canada. In Africa, we trade less than 10% with each other. So there's so much opportunity for US companies if they invest. The second would actually be to bring knowledge and technical skills. And this can come through joint ventures. We've had a few joint ventures in the past We've had food companies like KFC come in with franchises. So having joint ventures would be one way. Training would be another way. Actually setting up schools, training colleges, technical colleges as well would be another way for us to acquire these skills. Providing service, so having US CPAs and US lawyers and investment professionals and finance experts, people like that actually come in and begin to relate with us in Africa as we grow our markets and grow our businesses, because the future is, I don't have a way of describing what that future is like, but the future will be something else. And it's good to get in early, be pioneers in that field, gain the market, and let's all grow together.
Lola?
Thank you so much, Toki. I think on that point, actually, it brings me to talking about your work as the honorary consul for the government of Tanzania to Nigeria, which really is about opening up economic.
Yes, thank you very much, Lola. So the appointment is still relatively new, so I'm just a few months old in it. But yes, I'm engaged in economic diplomacy. And Tanzania really sees Nigeria as a great partner in progress and development and in increasing their trade across the continent. They already have a few Nigerian pioneers already in their economy. So they've already seen signs of what Nigerians can do. There's Sahara that's there in oil and gas. There's Dangote that's there in mining, that's cement, and a few others. So my remit is to develop that trade relationship and investment relationship between Tanzania and Lagos State. I'm actually specifically Lagos State, but because Lagos State is the economic powerhouse of Nigeria, it will actually impact on Nigeria as well. And what we're going to be doing, first of all, is opening up these trade relations through the chambers of commerce. Remember that this whole program here, where I said, is about ethics first, it's about compliance, it's about creating that environment that enables trust between those who are dealing with one another. So in that sort of going to be dealing chamber to chamber, the chamber movement is a global movement with established protocols and established guiding principles that makes it really comfortable for companies to deal with one another. And then we're focused on certain sectors. For example, hospitality is something that Tanzania has gotten a handle on. And there's a lot for Nigeria to learn from for hospitality. And Nigeria itself has prioritized hospitality. So we're pushing there for engagement and to learn as much as we can from the Tanzanians, also for opportunities to invest in Tanzania. The other area is, for example, agri-processing and manufacturing. Now, there's a lot for Tanzania that Tanzania can learn from Nigeria in terms of processing and manufacturing. And so that's another area of engagement. So the idea is engage where we have our strengths, leverage those strengths, and use those as the first areas of engagement and grow our relationship out from there. So that's essentially what it's going to be about in the beginning.
Toki, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but before we leave, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted any more information on the topics you've touched on, or perhaps to connect with you, what would be the best way for them to do, or the best places for them to go?
Okay, so a couple of things that I noted down that I would love to put out there is the WCF itself, the World Chamber Federation, ICC, where they have a lot of publication, documentation, stuff that people can read around compliance and guiding principles, and their guidebooks around issues of, we have the ICC rules, for example, on combating corruption and all of that. So that's the iccwbo.org. That's the website, and they can find what they want on that website in terms of publications. And there are lots of guides to help businesses with their compliance issue and on improving their corporate governance as well. There's lots of that. On the Nigerian side, there's the Convention for Business Integrity, which is cbinigeria.com as well. And they can find a lot of information there about what's going on with those sectors in Nigeria. The Maritime Anti-Corruption Network, for example, that's done so well and grown so large, that is being replicated across the West African coast. Started in Nigeria, yes, but now it's being asked for. And I think right now we're engaging with Ghana, and it's going to grow across the West African coast. So in terms of me, Toki Mabogunje, I can be found on LinkedIn. Please connect with me there. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Lola.
Toki, I wanted to thank you very much. I hope we can continue this conversation. Any final thoughts, Lola? Looks like she may be frozen up again. So with that, I will just say thank you, Toki, and I really hope we can continue this conversation.
Oh, sure. Anytime, Tom. Just give me a shout. Thank you so much. Thank you.
This is Tom Fox again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Business Integrity Innovations. We're linked to the SIPE website and the Ethics First website. So if you'd like any more information on either of those two initiatives and organizations, please check them out. Also, it'd be a great way for you to get involved in what I see as a business-to-business solution around the worldwide scourge of corruption and bribery. This podcast is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. I hope you will subscribe, rate, and review Business Integrity Innovations wherever great podcasts are listened to. Thanks so much for listening. We look forward to visiting with you again in our next episode.